Alright, 8th graders, so today's lesson is going to be about character analysis. We're not only going to talk about character traits, but we're also talking about how these character traits influences things like the conflict and the resolution. So just a real quick recap, a trait is the same thing as a quality. Character traits and character qualities show something about the personality of the character. It shows who they are as a person and what some typical behaviors or thoughts or actions might be. As we're analyzing, like I said, we're not just talking about the traits, but we're also talking about how those traits interact with the conflict and the resolution. In other words, a character's trait should cause or have a significant reaction to the conflict. So anytime we see that, we're going to highlight that in pink. They should also influence the resolution of the story. So anytime we see that, we're going to highlight that in yellow, just so that way we can keep track and make sure that we're actually talking about the conflict and resolution in our analysis and not just explaining what their traits are, which is the very basic layer of what we're doing. So, step 1, finding text evidence. So, what you might want to do before you find text evidence is think about what the character trait is. Sometimes that's easier, or you might start at the very beginning of the story and make sure you're showing text evidence. For me, I know at the beginning of the story that Jasmine is uneasy. Okay, so now that I know that, I'm going to go back in my book and I'm going to find a passage where we really see clearly that she's feeling uneasy or uncomfortable in her position. And we find this on the bottom of page 134 into the beginning of 135, where she says, no matter what I did right, or actually, she doesn't say this, again, she's uneasy, so she's just thinking it. No matter what I did right, someone was watching, waiting to pull me out of line, throw me in a detention center, then on an airliner with a one-way ticket to the Philippines or wherever. Okay, so since that's my text evidence, the important thing to remember is anytime you have text evidence, you start off with quotation marks to show they're not your own words. Next, since I'm starting in the middle of a sentence, I use these 3 dots, they're called an ellipses, to show that I've chopped out some of the author's original words. And then I copy my evidence, so bear with me. What I did right. Someone was watching, waiting to pull me out of line, throw me in a detention center, then on an airliner, with a one-way ticket to the Philippines or wherever. Now here, I've reached the end of my sentence that I'm going to use, but I don't put a period yet because I'm not done showing you where my evidence came from. So I put my end quotation marks and then a parentheses. In parentheses, I put the author's last name, which is De La Cruz, C-R-U-Z, and then I put the pages where I found it. So this was on pages 134 through 135, and parentheses, and now I can put a period. The period goes after the parentheses to show that this citation goes with this quote. It shows the 2 things are connected. Now I can't just give you my evidence, I need to tell you the context. In other words, I need to give you the background information so you understand why this evidence is important. What's going on at that point in the story? What do I, the reader, need to know to understand your quote and your writing? So here the context is, after finding the graffiti, Jasmine is trying to process what it means by talking to friends in microbiology. Okay, so this is literally just what's happening at the plot at this point. Now I need to go back to this box because while I already said what their character trait was, that they are uneasy, I need to answer the second question. Is this direct or indirect characterization? Review. Direct, the author literally tells you. So this is where in Harry Potter that J.K. Rowling literally says, Harry had a lightning-shaped scar on his forehead. They literally tell you what the trait is. You don't have to make any guesswork. That is direct characterization. Here, the author did not literally tell me that Jasmine is feeling uneasy or Jasmine is an uneasy character. So that would be an example of indirect characterization. This is when we have to infer based on the following. What a character says, what a character thinks, their actions, their appearance, which sometimes you have to infer, and yes, that can be important sometimes to more than just what they look like, and what their motivation is. Motivation is the reason why they do something. It's all behind that. So if you want to think of a good acronym for that when you're thinking about characters, think about STAM, I guess. STAM. Okay? Here, it's indirect because we infer based on what she is thinking. Alright. Last step is the commentary. The commentary is where you explain, and this is the hardest part for people to get. This is where you explain why your evidence shows this character's trait. This is also where I'm going to tie in, for this one, the conflict into the trait. Because she is uneasy, this kind of creates the problem in the story. So even though Jasmine has been accepted and this is where you hopefully spell things better than I do, to university, and has a group of friends, who love and support her, finding the graffiti, makes her feel unsafe. This creates the conflict and I'll go back and highlight this in a minute so that way I know that I've already touched on that. As she struggles to decide the correct course of action in response to the racist scrawl. She thinks, but is too uneasy to act or speak. Okay, and again, I'm going to highlight where I talk about and tie it into the conflict, just as a reminder to myself that I've already taken care of that part of my prompt. Okay, so that's the first step, and that's basically what you're going to do the whole time. But you want to find multiple pieces of evidence, and hopefully more than one trait of your character, so that way you have more to work with when we get to the actual writing. Moving along. And I'm going to show you my typed up version this time, so that way we'll speed through it. My next inference comes from this piece of text evidence from pages 138 through 139. This is when Jasmine is talking about the graffiti with her boyfriend Royce. Keep in mind that Royce is half white, so he has a very different perspective on this than Jasmine does. The text says, "Their words," I echoed. "Where do you think violence starts?" Insert ellipses for the break. "I don't want you to make me feel better. I want you to understand how students of color are feeling." End quotation mark, Cruz 138 through 9, and parentheses, period. This shows that Jasmine is upright or fair. You could also say that she's being righteous. Now, my commentary. Jasmine is no longer able to silence her inner thoughts. Her anger and discomfort have reached a level that forces her to speak out against the campus's inaction and her boyfriend's indifference. Now here, she technically hasn't really done anything yet. We haven't resolved our problem of how to react when you see terrible things going on around you. However, she is starting to move towards that point. So I'm going to double code this, okay? She is no longer content to sit silent and feel unwanted. She demands change and demands to be heard. She's starting to react to the conflict. She's figuring out how she feels, but she's also not quite reached the resolution yet. So I'm going to highlight it in both so I know that I'm working towards a resolution. I'm in between the two moments. My last piece of evidence comes from the very end of the story when we reach our resolution. It states, hundreds of students flooded the quad, all to reclaim the space the graffiti briefly tried to inhabit. We needed to cleanse the toxicity. Now, my context there is kind of loose, so I'm actually going to make a tweak. Instead, I'm going to say that for context, she is at a rally to protest the hate crimes at Stanford. Just because it makes it a little clearer for my reader, if they haven't read my story, what exactly she's doing and why this is significant. Again, this is indirect characterization because this time I'm inferring it from her actions, and it shows that she is confident and self-assured. My commentary. At first, Jasmine isn't sure how to react to seeing hate speech graffiti on campus. But now, and here's where I'm reaching my resolution, after hearing people pretend like it's not a big deal and seeing campus administration try and erase it, rather than directly deal with it, she's had enough. Instead of worrying, and here I'm going to highlight it in yellow, my resolution color, instead of worrying about what people might do to her, she is confident that her voice matters and acts against the hate. It's a risky decision, but she does it anyways because it's the right thing to do. By speaking out, she discovers that her one voice is part of something greater and isn't alone as she assumed. And you can kind of hear that I'm getting a little themey, a little lessony in that last sentence. So this is what you're doing today. You're finding examples of character traits in your story. You're going to fill out these little charts telling me the evidence, the context where it comes from in the story, what the trait is, and whether that's an indirect or direct characterization. And in the commentary, you're connecting it, not only explaining what the trait is, but you're connecting it back to the conflict or the resolution. So if you are confused at all, feel free to watch parts of the video again, or when we get to the independent work time and I'm done with my lesson with 7th grade, feel free to raise your hand to ask questions.